Have you seen those video clips on Reddit where they've taken a movie clip and put some silly text on it? In some of them, they do this cool technique where the text follows something in the video. I'm going to show you how you can create that effect yourself using only the free software Blender. You don't need to be a professional special effects artist or pirate After Effects. Once you watch this video, you'll see that it's pretty easy to do. There are 4 basic steps. Track the image element, create your text, make your text follow the track, and finally, render your result. The first thing that you need to do when you open Blender is open up the preset view for motion tracking. You could build this interface yourself, but this preset has everything you need. The clip I have today is a short video of a sea lion, and I'll go ahead and open that up. Here we've opened the clip, and down here is our timeline. We can scrub the timeline, but note that by default, Blender only starts from 1 and ends at 250. That is 250 frames. That only goes up to here. If you needed to go longer, because this video clip is longer than 250 frames, you can extend this and just extend it to however long your video is. Anyways, let's work on the first, say, 300 frames. Okay, so the basics of motion tracking are you want to find something for the computer to recognize, and then that something has to be obvious enough for the computer to be able to track it as it moves. Since we want our text to follow this head right here, we're going to go ahead, this is our tracking view, we're going to go ahead and add a marker, and we're just going to click it into the middle of its head. So by default, these markers track a very small area, and if you were doing motion tracking where you're reconstructing some 3D movement, you'd want to make a lot of markers that each track something very precise, and then that way the computer can solve the motion for you. But in our case, not only are we not doing 3D tracking, we're doing 2D tracking. The thing we're tracking changes as it moves, and it's kind of an imprecise target. So what I'm going to do is make it a little more lenient, and the first thing I'm going to do is in here, under Marker Display, I'm going to enable the Search display. So now we have 2 boxes shown for this track. The inner box, that's the area of pixels that it's actually going to track. You can see that enlarged here. And then the outer box, that's the area that the computer is going to look for in each frame. So basically, it's going to search this square for where it moves as we change frames back and forth. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase both of these. And the main thing here is I want to track the entire head. And I want the computer, I want Blender to follow the general shape of this head. And I think the seal is going to move back and forth pretty quickly, so the position might change quite a bit. So I'm going to also make the search area quite a bit bigger. Now the other thing is, right now we could try to start tracking it. So I'm at frame 18, and then these track buttons, the left one says, okay, starting at this frame, track the motion going back in time. And then the right one says, starting at this frame, track the motion going forward in time. I'm going to try tracking it backwards first, since I'm closer to the beginning. Okay, so now if I scrub this, you can see that the tracker is tracking that head as it moves back from frame 18 to frame 1. Okay, so now that we've done that easy part, let's start at frame 18 and start tracking forward. Okay, so all of a sudden it stopped at frame 25. And this is because between frame 24 and frame 25, the thing that it was tracking changed more than is allowed. And so basically the tracker lost the object. And this is not surprising because in this video, not only is the head changing shape as it moves and turns, but the background's also changing. We have this white background here, and then a darker background here that this tracker has started moving onto. So there are a few ways that you can try to make the tracker a little more lenient. And the first thing you can do is, in here, the motion model, currently we have just location. And what that means is that the tracker is only going to look for changes in the location of whatever it's tracking. But if that picture that it's tracking changes in size or it rotates, then the tracker will lose it. What you can do instead is you can choose options like location and rotation, location and scale, or all three of them. And what this basically means is that not only is the tracker going to look for changes in the location of the head, but it's also going to look for changes as that search area rotates or as it gets bigger and smaller. This is especially good if what you're tracking, maybe it moves towards the camera or away from the camera. Basically, it's getting bigger as it gets near the camera, or it's getting smaller as it goes away from the camera. And so scale accounts for that, and then rotation, obviously, that accounts for if that object rotates. Affine and perspective. These two motion models allow this track to not only change its rotation and scale, but also to change its shape a little bit. And you can see that as I change this area, you can see how that's affecting the object that's being tracked. The other thing that we can do to make the tracker more lenient is change the match. So currently, by default, it's set the keyframe match. And what that means is it's going to start at this frame, 18, and then as I track, it's going to compare every frame against my starting frame, frame 18. So it'll compare frame 19 against 18, frame 20 against 18, and so on. In general, this is pretty good because it makes sure that as long as you keep a good keyframe, as long as you're starting from a good keyframe, it'll try to keep it on track relative to this good frame of reference. It's not good, however, if whatever you're tracking changes gradually. So another example might be if the lighting in the scene is gradually changing over the course of the scene. In that case, the tracker can tolerate some change up to a certain point, but then once it's changed enough compared to the original keyframe, that tracker is going to give up. So the other option is previous frame. In this case, the tracker is always comparing each frame against the previous frame, and that way, as long as the difference between each consecutive frame isn't too big, then it'll have a better chance at tracking the object. So let's try that. And I'm going to start from where I left off, frame 24, and I'm going to try tracking forward. And unfortunately, it seems like it's still not cooperating. So frame 25, we're still stuck. So sometimes, depending on your input video, you're going to get stuck, and you have to manually help the tracker out a bit. In this case, what we can do is, so in this frame, which is one of the track frames, we see that our center point is kind of on this chin right here on the C line. So in the next frame, what we can do is just click and drag and move that center point back on the same spot that we were in. And then we can continue tracking again. Okay, we got the frame 27, lost it again. Again, the center point is on the chin. I'm going to move it on that chin, and we can try again. Okay, so here's something interesting that happened. If you look at between, let's see, frame 29 and 30, you see that this track jumped all of a sudden. It went from this chin right here all the way down to this neck area. And the reason here is because we've made our settings too lenient. And in this case, it looks like the search area could be smaller. Basically what happens is the tracker looked around and tried to find the best match for the previous frame, and for some reason it decided that this previous frame had the best match from here. And that's why by default these settings are pretty strict. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clear out all of the automatically generated tracks after this frame, and that deleted this part of the track. And I'm going to do the next frame for the tracker manually and then try again. Okay, we got a little further. Let's see, maybe I need to okay. So this is going to get kind of tedious if I have to fix it every few frames. Sometimes I do find that it's easier to just start over. So let's see. Actually, I'm just going to delete this track and start over. So make a track here. We'll expand that search area. Let's see if we can get his head. Let's see if we can get a better starting point for his head. Motion model, fine. Match previous frame. Let's try this again. Oh, that's interesting. So you can see how in order to try to match the shape of the head, it started skewing this track more and more. And then at some point it just got stuck and couldn't continue. So what I think happened was that track skewed so much that it was about to exceed this area of the search box. So what I did was, by making the search box bigger, this track was able to track all the way back to the beginning. And so starting again from this frame, let's try tracking forward. Okay, so we got stuck again at frame 30. I think we might have run into the same problem here, where this track is getting so skewed that it's reached the size of the search area. So I'm just going to increase that, and let's keep going. Okay, so that's quite a bit better. And you can see it's going by itself, and it's making quite a bit of progress. We might have run into the same problem again. See, this track gets skewed so much that it exceeded the search box. Let's make that bigger again. Keep going. Not a whole lot of movement right now. Okay, head's turning again. Okay, so far we've tracked 238 frames of this video, and you can see it's kind of interesting to look at how this shape changes. That track, the center point, it's no longer on the mouth, it's on the neck, and that happened because we were too lenient with our tracks, and that tends to cause the track to start drifting, especially because of the previous frame match. Since it's no longer comparing each frame against a reference frame, sometimes this track would just start drifting, and yeah, each frame kind of looks like the previous frame, but the center point is getting farther and farther away from what we had originally. Anyways, for the purposes of this video, it's not too bad, because since we're just trying to make some text follow the head, no one's going to really notice as long as that text moves with the head. Okay, so now that we have our working track, it's now time to add some text to it to get the motion. And so here's our 3D view. I'm gonna minimize this pane just a bit. Okay, so by default, Blender gives you this box. It gives you a camera, it gives you a light. All of these things we don't need. So go ahead, you can right click each one and then delete. That'll get rid of it. Right click, delete, let's get rid of those. What we actually need is, we need our own camera that's pointed straight down, and I'll show you why in a moment. What I actually want to do is look at it from the top, create my camera. So now I have a camera that's pointed directly downwards. And if I grab this blue handle, I move that camera upwards. And what I'm going to do is I have this camera pointed directly downwards, and I'm going to basically use the floor, this X and Y axis, to put the text on. So let's try that again. Go back to the top. We have our camera now. Now I'm going to add some text. So now I have my text object. And to edit the text, to change what it says, all I have to do, let me zoom in a bit, all I have to do is hit Tab, and then I can start editing the text. So let's see. Okay, I've edited the text, hit Tab again to get out of edit mode, and here we are back in object mode. Now I want to look at it through the camera. And so this light area here, that's the region that's within the view of the camera. This text is kind of outside of the camera, and it's kind of big, right? Like if this is going to be our entire video, this text is going to take up way too much space, especially since it's moving around. So I'm going to hit S, and I'm just going to move my mouse a bit and shrink that. So here's my text. If I right click and drag, I can move it around. But what we actually want to do is we actually want to make this follow the track. So you can do that by, once you select this text, click this chain icon. That can constrain this object. And I want to add an object constraint. And I want to say follow track. It's in this motion tracking category. And basically what it's going to do is, instead of this text having its own position, it's going to use whatever position that track is. And to make it easier to see, in this track area, go to the Solve tab, go to Scene Setup, Set as Background, and that gives us a preview of where our text is in relation to the video. So, in Follow Track, I'm going to uncheck Active Clip, just have it, so that way I make sure I select the right movie clip. That's the zoo one. And then I click that. Well, I only have one of them. Now, if I did have multiple tracks, I could change the name here, head track. And then I could select that here. But again, I only have one track because that's all I need. And then the camera, I only have one camera, and we're done. So now you can see the text is following the head as it moves along. But there's one problem here, which is the text has an origin in this lower left corner, and it's that origin point that gets constrained to this track. But what if we wanted the text to be kind of underneath the head here, instead of having its corner on top of the head directly? And to do that, we can use what's called an empty. So I'm going to remove this constraint. Click this X, that constraint is gone. And so now this text is no longer following the head. And instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty, and let's just use plain axes. And an empty object is basically an item that is invisible in the scene. It has no dimensions, no length, no size, no mass. It's just a single point in space. But the important thing is that it's an object that other objects can then have constraints and relationships to. So this empty is just going to start off in the middle here, and we're going to set up the same follow track except for the empty. Choose that head track again, and now we have this nice crosshairs over that sea lion head. So let's say this is our reference point, and then let's say I want the text to be somewhat under the head, around there. And I want it to follow the head, but stay underneath it. So I'm going to select this text, hold Shift, and then right click and also select the empty. And then I'm going to make this text a child of the empty. And I can do that now that I have both objects selected with Control P. And I set that to object. So when you do Control P, it's important that you select the child first and then the parent last, because that parent will have that brighter highlight, meaning it's the main thing selected out of the two that are selected. And that's how the Control P parent command knows that this is the parent, this is the child. Okay, so basically what we've achieved here is that the text can have its own position relative to its parent, which is the empty. And then the empty's position is directly taken from this track. And now you can see we have some motion tracking, and that text is following that C-line head as it goes. Okay, next thing we can do is, well, we probably don't want this gray color here. And actually, if you render it now, you're probably not going to get quite what you expected. So right now we have this black text. Because this text is a gray material, there are no lights, so it's black. And then the background, instead of being transparent, it's this dark, ugly gray color. So text first, we can fix that by going to the Materials tab here, New Material, and we want this to be, well, let's just make it a bright red for now. And we're actually going to say that it's shadeless, meaning that it doesn't have lighting. It's just a flat red color no matter what lights there are in the scene. If we render again, okay, we have the red color. We still don't have this video background. And so there's a few ways of doing this. What I'm going to show you first is how to use the compositor. So Blender has this compositing engine that lets you take multiple things and basically overlay them together. So here, I've switched to a node editor view. And then in here, instead of editing a material, I want to edit my compositing layout. And then I'm going to enable the usage of nodes here, and it's going to drop in some default nodes. So you can see I have my render layers, and that goes to the compositor, just one step. There's no video here, and there's nothing that says that I want the text to be overlaid on top of the video. So we're going to fix both of those. The first thing we need to do is, remember, this is our render output, and this dark gray background is not transparent. And because it's an opaque background, if we try to overlay it on top of anything, we're just going to completely cover up what's underneath. So we can fix that. In the shading options under render, so render, shading, alpha mode. Instead of drawing a sky where we can put in some kind of like cloud texture or something, I'm just going to say it's transparent. And now if we try rendering, okay, we see this checkers. That's a good sign. So that means that we have our opaque text over a transparent background. Okay, so back to the compositor. Go to node editor. We're in compositing mode, and it's kind of hard to see. What we need here is we need to add our video. So what we can do is add input, movie clip. Okay, and I can select my existing movie clips here by clicking that left icon, and I'm going to select that same C-line movie clip. Okay, I'm going to actually make this bigger so that you can see it. Next thing we need is the alpha over. And so this basically means that we're going to combine these two images into one. So instead of taking the render layer directly to the output, I'm going to take it, make it one of the inputs in alpha over. I'm going to take the movie clip, make it the other input, And then we're going to take the output of that compositing action and put it in the compositor. Okay, did we get it correct? Let's find out. So go back here, and at this point, let's make this the image editor, and we'll render it again. So it looked like what happened was we took the text and we put the video on top. And what that tells me is we probably got these two nodes, these two inputs switched around. So let's try reversing that. And what do you know? We have our previous render result. We have the word text feed me here. And let's try going to another frame. And you notice that as I change my time in here, that text is not following the head. Well, the reason for that is this text is still based on the previous render, not on the current frame's render. And so what I need to do is I need to re-render that. So if I click re-render, then I go back, try a different frame, we see that the text does follow the head. And maybe I want to move the text up a little, get it closer to the head. I can just go back into 3D view, take this green handle, drag it up a little closer. Let's check it out again. So again, re-render. Okay, we see that the text is following the video just as planned. Now, we're pretty close to done. The only thing left to do is actually render it into a new movie file. So that's what this render tab here is for. We have our options to render just one frame, the whole animation. Obviously we want to do the animation, but first what we need to do is, well, we need to choose a different place for the output. Unless you want to put it in the temp directory, that's totally fine. And then instead of rendering out a series of still images in the PNG format, I'm going to choose FFmpeg video. Normally in any kind of special effects pipeline, any kind of CG pipeline, you want to render your intermediate frames, individual files, into something like maybe OpenEXR or TIFFs. And then you take all those files, you send them to the next stage in the pipeline. Well, we're not going to get that complicated. What we just want is a one-shot command. So FFmpeg video, that means that as we render the animation, we're going to also encode it into a video file at the same time. In this encoding tab, have some presets. Probably if you want to post this on the web, you're going to choose MPEG-4, codec H.264. That's a pretty good choice, medium quality, medium speed. Come on, this is a silly animation. Like, how much quality do you actually need, right? So that's all good. Audio codec none. In the spirit, in the tradition of GIFs, there's no audio. So with that being said, right, the last option we want to check is, so by default, Blender sets up this 1080p resolution, but Blender says, okay, for now, by default, we're going to set it to 50% of that. And this is basically a useful setting for when you're working on something. You don't want to render it at the full resolution because that'll take too long, so you render it at half size for the previews. And then when you're ready, you can crank it up all the way. Well, this is kind of unnecessary because our source video right here is only 720p. And even if we cut it down to half size, that's probably going to be good enough to post to something like Reddit. So I'm just going to leave it there, or what I could do is change these, make this 1280 by 720. Frame rate, we should have remembered to double check this when we started. Luckily this video is 24 FPS, but before you get started, you should just check to make sure that the frame rate setting in your render is the same as your video file. Okay, now if we render animation, we're going to see, okay, it's rendering the text, it's compositing it on top of the preview. Don't worry if some of the frames in the preview look messed up. That's just because you're seeing a partial result mid-render. Alright, so this tutorial covered how to do 2D motion tracking in Blender, specifically how to use it to add some text that follows something in a video and produce an animated result out of it. If you liked this video, if you thought it was helpful, hit that thumbs up button. I really appreciate it. And if you want to see more Blender tutorials and videos on my channel, let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions, ask in the comments as well. Maybe one of the other viewers might know the answer. Thanks for watching.